guest speaker is Reed, and we're just doing a Q&A kind of session. So some of the things we're discussing is just his journey in skydiving, tips for flying, flexibility and balance, and discussing the European scene versus Australian skydiving scene and other things. So your audio will be muted while Reed and me speaking, but all of you have the capability of unmuting it. And just be mindful that if you do speak, you'll pop up on the recording like as your main picture. And just be wary of that. And if you don't want that to happen, you can just put questions in the chat box and I can ask them for you. Okay, so we'll start. So Reed, the first question is, can you tell us a little about your time in Penrith and your beginning of your skydiving career and how it developed?
Yeah, so I started skydiving in 2012. I was in my last year of high school. And just after that year of school, I didn't have any plans afterwards. I was getting pretty deep into skydiving by that stage already. And then I was actually working with Dale. I'm sure a lot of you guys know. And just skydiving a lot that year afterwards. And I applied for the tunnel. I saw, I think on Facebook or something, the jobs were going for the tunnel. And it was going to be opening sometime around, at that stage, they were saying mid-2013 or something. I can't remember exactly. I remember it was super delayed. But so I applied for that, ended up making it through, flying up to Sydney to do the fitness test and stuff like that. And yeah, just kept making it through. I think I did okay in the interviews. I think unknowingly I said all the right things because I hadn't asked anybody, because I didn't know anybody who worked in tunnels, obviously. It was pretty slim at the time in Australia. And I think I unknowingly said the right things to get the job. I didn't mention that I wanted to fly a lot. I didn't mention just being stoked to fly all the time. I think because genuinely, I was going from high school. So I think in the interview, I basically just said wanting to have a job that was enjoyable, wanting to work with a good crew of people. So it was all things that I meant legitimately, except I think it was just luck that I didn't talk about how excited I was to fly or anything, because as we know, iFly isn't all that stoked all the time on people applying and just saying that they want to fly a lot. So I was lucky enough to make it through all the interview process anyway, getting the job. It was pretty fun because the first group of instructors that got hired, we flew over to America to do our training. So it was pretty sick to fly over with a group of young dudes who obviously ended up being really good friends of mine anyway. And yeah, it was sick. I really enjoyed it. And then, yeah, I guess that takes us to actually getting the job and beginning. I broke my leg. I was super unlucky and I broke my leg, I think 6 or 7 days before the tunnel got turned on for the first time. So it was a tib-fib compound fracture as well. It was decent. And so after that, I went home for a little bit to recover for a couple of months. I went back up. I was super gutted. I was way behind, obviously. And as soon as I could start to fly again, I was just, flying. I think I overtook everybody in amount of time flown within very, very little time in comparison to how much time I had actually been back and flying. And yeah, I think that takes us through most of the question, doesn't it, Sarah?
Yeah. How did you, when you left, why did you leave iFly, and how did you kind of start, to choose to go to Europe?
I think I'd always been interested in the Europe scene and definitely had been interested in going over there and checking it out myself. There was a few Australians that had gone over there, like Keithy, the Greeley brothers, Ty, Mason, a few other Australians were there, but it was a lot of Australians, I think, that had been over there for a long time. The main ones that went over there that were in that were similar-ish age to me, at least, was or just the generation just slightly before was Mason, Ty, and the Greeleys and stuff like that. So I was super interested. You'd see the videos that were coming out. I think everybody's super interested in the scene in Europe, especially. It seems more linked to the Australian scene, at least, like with friendships and stuff like that. And it's obviously a lot more like prominent online and in videos and everything. So I made the decision after like 2.5 years or something to quit the tunnel and to start to travel. And I went over to America first, actually. And I just like did some small tunnel camps there and participated in a couple of Fly for Life camps back to back, which were like super beneficial in the beginning. And then after that, I went to Europe and ended up staying there a lot around like Fly Spot. I was chilling at Fly Spot quite a bit, and then did my first European summer season there. And I guess like the main motivation was just to see what it was like and to just have a challenge, you know, like after working full time as an instructor for like 2.5 years, it was kind of like the challenges that had originally intrigued me so much were kind of not there so much. And it's something I think I understand more about my personality now than I even did at the time, is that I really enjoy, and I almost think like I seek out challenge. And so the challenge in the beginning was to see what level I could push my own flying to. And then the challenge kind of shifted to working for myself and seeing if that was a viable option. And then obviously focusing more and more heavily on coaching in the sky and in the tunnel. So I think that's something I understand more about myself now. Like I enjoy a challenge, even if it's kind of like at times having these existential crises around whether I can actually make something work or whether I actually enjoy something that I'm doing or not. But that was the big motivation towards it, for sure. Seeking out a challenge, exploring a little bit.
And what's it like working and living in Europe?
It's quite similar. I would say like from a lot of the places that I've traveled, which part of me has been like a little bit let down by in a way, or like underwhelmed with, was that since we have such a globalized culture now, everything feels pretty similar no matter where you go. Like with the exception of some like places maybe like in Central America and stuff, or like Indonesia feels kind of different, but everywhere is such a globalized culture that I find it's pretty similar. And then especially around Europe, there's differences around like small differences around, definitely a big difference is people's education level. I find them much more educated in Europe just because most of the countries have better education systems. So it's not so daunting to try to seek tertiary education. Whereas in Australia, I feel like for me, it was always like, if I wanted to study something, I knew that I would end up with this crazy debt racked up after the end of it. So that would be one difference that I notice. But apart from that, it really did feel similar. And I was like living in share houses all the time in Australia. When I went to Europe, I was straight into living in share houses as well. So it never felt too different. And I think the human brain is very quick to normalize the levels once you make a change anyway. So I feel like I was feeling a certain way in working as a tunnel instructor. And once I made the change to move to working for myself and living overseas and everything, I think that was one thing that I definitely noticed, was how quick the brain is to normalize the levels or normalize what's happening around you. And then you need to, like as humans, then you seek out something else, or you seek out something else to get that similar feeling that you had when you took a transitional step from one thing to the other before. Yeah.
And this is a question someone's posed me. So what do you think the difference is between the Australian skydiving scene and the European skydiving scene? Like, is there differences?
Yeah, for sure. I think one thing is just the dense population that there is in Europe. Like each country has their own scene. A lot of countries have really, really strong scenes. Travel is so easy. I see it as though if you took Australia and just I didn't even know how much like magnitudes more of a skydiving population. You know, like if you just took Australia and made the population density that was skydiving like so much greater, then that's what it would be. Like there would naturally be much more events and everything. As it stands in Australia, it's quite small. And over there, I think there's a kind of laziness that comes with having the good weather that Australia has as well. We have all this time to skydive. And maybe a part of it's the Australian attitude as well, is like super relaxed about things, like easygoing kind of thing. But I find Europe, you see a lot more of the same people getting around the different events. And you see a lot more people traveling just because, one, I think because there's so much more of a population of skydivers over there, and the travel is so easy. And then I think the time constraint of having a season that's in some countries, you know, 3 or 4 months long, would be the peak season, would be like 3 months in like Scandinavia and Northern Europe. Then it kind of adds that necessity to squeeze in all the events into one singular time. And then in the off season, people will travel a little bit more. They might go to 1 or 2 events in, say, in Spain or something. But they're not skydiving apart from that. So I think there's that, maybe a little bit of like absence makes the heart grow fonder, like that absence of skydiving in their lives for a fair chunk of the year drives them and motivates them when they can skydive. And then another thing is all the events are kind of packed into 3 or 4 months of time. But those would be the main differences, I think.
Is there anything you think we could learn from what they do to what we do? Like we could actually take from their kind of skydiving scene and bring it to Australia to improve ours?
I think to be honest, like the scene in Australia is pretty good. And I think since I've been in it, it was, especially in Victoria, it was looking really big when I first got into it. I remember seeing all the people at Ngambie when I first started in 2012, like there was a really good free fly scene, and it's kind of started to trickle off from there because a lot of these jumpers that had made their friends like years previous, they kind of started to be interested in other things, or other things in life started to grab their attention and their time. So they started to drop off a little bit. And it just didn't seem like the flow of new jumpers was there so much, or new jumpers that were super keen. But now I see like the events are really good in Australia. The main thing I see is like just the population. Like we just need a greater population of skydivers. And I wouldn't say that I have any ideas on how to achieve that. But like if you look at America, it's like there would be a number of drop zones in every state, and they're all going to be running at a decent capacity. Not like crazy busy or anything. But I definitely see that like the population density is just the thing that drives and the thing that gives more capacity for events and funding and stuff like that. But I think in terms of like Europe is obviously big in the seminars. And I think in the last maybe like 3 or 4 years, there's been a lot more seminars getting into the Australian scene, and kind of like I have a similar vibe in European events that I do to Australian events, except everyone's just a little bit more reckless in Australia. About Australia.
What are your favourite events in Europe, and like boogie-in events for both boogies and skill camps?
Yeah, so my favorite ones would be, I really enjoyed in Europe, I would say there's some really good ones in Norway. And I guess because I've been based in Norway, that's where I've like made friends and stuff, and I enjoy staying there. There was one that was running for a few years, and then that finished and one took the place of it. The new one's called Far Out Free Fly Festival. That one's like in the beginning or middle of July. It's on the east side of Norway. It's kind of like in the Ngambie drop zone. Like it's a drop zone with a caravan park, or it's kind of like old Ngambie actually. So even more gangster. And there was like really good events. Like the guy who organizes it organizes like a really good party night. The week of jumping is like really well organized. So that one in Norway, Far Out Free Fly, I would say is like super fun. And it kind of has a similar vibe to like some of the DDs or something. Like it's a really good level of like, it's a good level of jumping. It's good, well organized and super fun. There was, I haven't been like the drop zone in Mazinger, obviously, where they have the angle week light and angle week. That's like super good. I was there like for an angle week light coaching, and it was absolutely beautiful, like insane. That was super cool. There's Sunset Boogie in Finland, is a really cool experience where you're jumping through the night. You start at like, I think we were starting at like 9 or 10 at night, and we would jump through until like 4 or 5 in the morning. And it's just on that like latitude where the sun just kind of dips below the horizon for maybe like half an hour. So you just get that sunset that's just super elongated. That's really beautiful. Stay in cabins around a lake that was like super nice. And then any of the Tora Tora events, like they're probably the most well run for sure. They have like, as that like brand of events go, they keep on refreshing their events. They keep on like renewing ideas. Like the heli camp isn't happening anymore, but that was insane. Paradise Portugal actually was, I think, easily my favorite event last year. It's like we had super nice weather, a little bit chilly in the mornings, but then the days were beautiful. The drop zone is in the amazing location. I think that would probably be the highlight of my events for last year, especially because there was like, like super fun to DJ there as well. That was the event where I like DJ'd the most, and that was sick. But yeah, any of the Tora Tora events are super class. So I would recommend them highly.
And is there any events that you would go to as, not as a coach, but as a participant?
Yeah, there was also an event in Algarve in Portugal last year, but that was kind of like an invite only thing. So in terms of going as a participant to an event that's open, I would probably say, I mean, all these say the Tora Tora events, they always cater to a high level of jumpers as well. There'll be at least one group where it's like really nice level that I would easily slot into and fit in really well. But I think as a like high level, high standard goes, probably the Fly for Life events. And they're running them in Europe now as well. So then it kind of ties into the Europe question, but States as well, like DeLand is super nice. Yeah, I've always had a really good time in DeLand. And the Fly for Life camps are definitely, they have a really good name for a reason. Like they have a really high standard name that they keep, and they definitely keep it not just because of hype, like it's super good events. Yeah, I would say those ones. But I would also pick, but now it's like, if I'm speaking from my point of view as well, like I would pick places that are either unique, or I would pick places that have other activities that are also cool to do as well. So like last year, like around Portugal was beautiful because you're not just on a drop zone out in the middle of nowhere. Even though that's my favorite kind of drop zone for events, like that's why I love Ngambie so much. If there's events in Australia, that's like my favorite, or it would be like Ngambie or York or like somewhere like that where everybody's staying on the drop zone. You get a really cool sense of community.
Talking about Australia, what event would you choose? What event would you choose in Australia to go to? Like, what would be your best event that you like to go to for a coach?
To coach.
Yeah, to coach.
I mean, the group that Mason puts together is just ridiculous. Like, the DDs have been super good. I've enjoyed everyone immensely. But I mean, either the AWOL events or the DD events, which is obviously me just saying any events in Australia. I think it's just run by like I really get along with those groups of people. I guess the longer you're in skydiving, the more you like. It's just a lot of people that I've known for a while. So yeah. But if I had to say, I mean, I've coached at quite a few DDs and not so many AWOL events, not the bigger ones anyway. But yeah, I think like, to be honest, like not just because they're mates or anything, but both AWOL and DD are just running super good events, and it's really honest. The thing that I like about that is like, it's kind of like bringing that Australian mentality of like, they might not be the flashiest events. Like we don't need to resort to like having these gimmicks that maybe other events do in Europe. It's like, it's just like high quality coaching, good groups of people. Yeah. So.
Well, I clearly agree with you because I go to both of them all the time. So.
But you go to both of them because that's what's happening.
Yeah. This is something that, so there's a lot of jokes around tunnel instructors and canopies, but you clearly don't fall within that category. So can you tell us a little bit about how you developed your canopy skills? Because you definitely don't fall in the joke category of.
Yeah, maybe at one stage I did. I'm lucky enough to have famous skills that I can not fall into the category anymore. I started, because I didn't jump so much when I was working in the tunnel. So I really started to jump more, I think, when I was like, just started traveling and went to the US. And when I started to, like, I did the 2 fly flat camps back to back. And then I was working in skydiving full time by that stage. So at that time, I think when I really started to focus on canopy was when I had Katana, like 120 was the first one where I really felt like I started to actually be interested in swooping, because I never really thought the swooping would be a thing that I would get into. I always thought like it would be fun, but I just never saw myself being current enough or kind of skydiving enough to necessitate learning to swoop, because I always kind of had a respect for it, like as being, I'm definitely not like marginalizing free fall collisions, but in general, like that's the dangerous part of skydiving. Like the canopy flying is for sure where things go wrong, where people get complacent and everything like that. So I really started to dial in some turns on even like the Sabre 150 was where I kind of like got the feeling of like, oh, going across the ground fast feels fun. And then once I was like, if I was to actually give advice about how to get into swooping, which always comes with a big disclaimer, is like at that stage, I was surrounded by skydivers that were far, far better than me constantly. I would either be like living with them or at events with them, like all the time, traveling with them from event to event. So I just made it a massive, massive goal to seek out the people who I enjoyed the style of, the best swoopers on the drop zone, you know, like go up to them, ask them how they got into it, ask them what their techniques were for when they started to learn like 90-degree turns, because I've never really had so much formal canopy coaching. For me, it's always been like working at events and kind of like dialing things in from there. And then once I would downsize, I would do some high pulls and some hop and pops and stuff and really get a feel for the wing in that way. But I think the biggest thing for me has been asking for input from everybody, asking their opinions, asking if what they think I'm doing is like too radical, or like I would obviously seek out people who were similar to me, like young people that don't mind being a bit aggressive and don't mind like not like taking risks, and like I don't really like that term, except kind of once they start doing something, they put a lot of effort into it and they're and I don't know, they're aggressive in their learning technique, you know? So I would seek out people who were similar to me, which was really nice to get the answers that you want to hear. But then I'd also ask people who were completely different to me. And then sometimes I would just discount what they were saying. And other times I would take on like, you know, like there's always something to take in from somebody who learns far differently to the way that you do. But I think for me, like when I, like to cut it short, it would be like when I first started to get into canopy, it was when I was working full time in skydiving already. So I was surrounded by people that I could take in a lot of useful input from, which was really, really good.
Cool. Now we're going to switch gears and take it to tunnel.
Now I'm giving advice and backing my advice up.
So, okay, so a big question that we've been asking a lot of people, like tunnel instructors, is what would you recommend one to get into tunnel? Like, do you recommend spending, say, kind of like what I did? I went to a couple of overseas camps and did like 10 hours like that. Or do you recommend doing a couple of hours here and there? Or like, how's the best progression, do you think, for like just a normal everyday skydiver that has maybe, I don't know, $10,000 something to spend on tunnel? How would you recommend their progression is?
I think in the beginning, unless you have enough money and time, like you say, if you live near a tunnel that you can fly regularly, I think flying regularly is the best option if you can't afford to supplement it with large chunks. I think flying regularly will always win. It's going to take you a little bit longer, but it's a really good option. But if you can supplement it with large chunks, then that just massively speeds up the learning process of anything. And I've had people on camps like just make massive breakthroughs that you can see that they wouldn't have these breakthroughs in such a short amount of time had they not have been on 7 to 11, or even like like my first camp, I think people flew 14 and a half hours each in 12 days, which is just ridiculous. But they all made heaps of progress. But I think the supplementing like large chunks with smaller, more frequent flying is the best method for sure. And I think a lot of Australians, especially, like there's a really good kind of like network of people that are doing exactly that. There's a lot of camps available. There's a lot of people that are taking advantage of that. And I think you can see the people that are progressing faster in the sport are the people that are doing that. And even like if I was to speak, like it's not like I'm I can't relate to the average skydiver in that way because I'd never flown in a tunnel before I had the job in one. So I've only flown in a tunnel while working in one. But that would always be how my progression went as well. Like some days I would fly, like 2 hours or something. And then there would be times where, there wasn't much times where I would have time off. There would be days where I would fly heaps, and then there would be days where, like weeks where I wouldn't fly so much. I would only fly like I never only flew my free time. There would be weeks where I flew less, for sure. And I noticed like the big chunks where you tire yourself out, like you guys would on tunnel camps, they would lead to these massive breakthroughs, which you can then keep frequent and keep current in your regular flying that you do, if that's the way.
And what would you recommend to get the most out of it, like to utilize the tunnel to bring it to the sky? If you want to use tunnel to get into the sky and improve your skydiving techniques, what would your best like recommendations to do that?
In terms of frequency of flying or actual style of flying?
Style, frequency, like both.
Yeah. I think the frequency I would just repeat myself from what I just said. That kind of frequency I think would be really beneficial. The style it's really hard. There's not going to be like a one size fits all. It's going to be like some people respond really well to low speed and some people prefer it. I like in my learning progression, I preferred a mixture of both. because you need that kind of high speed, high pressure air that comes in handy when you're going to be in the sky. And then obviously the low speed comes in handy for actually realizing the potential that you have to move in the sky. So, yeah, like the way that I can only speak from the way that I teach, but the way that I teach is definitely a mixture of both, like supplementing the high speed with the low speed, not focusing on one thing for too long, is the way that I usually tend to do it.
Yeah. And what tips would you give for someone that's done, say, 20 hours of coaching and then they want to try and do some uncoached times in between? What would your tips be for them?
Yeah, so to transition to uncoached, it would be, say, like on a camp, if you can stay afterwards, or, I mean, it's really about like an open dialogue with your coach and your spotters as well. Like because as a coach, I think we all assume that people kind of know what they can and can't do. Except then you always have like a harsh awakening when somebody just does a layout and you're like, have you ever done a layout before? Like unspotted. So
That's me.
that was so many people. Like Arno did the same thing. I was like, yeah, good. And then just does the layout into the glass. And I was like, what? But everyone's done it. And every coach has had that moment of being like, oh my God, why? Like, and then just so lucky that somebody's fine. But yeah, like an open dialogue with your coaches and your spotters. Because each person is going to be different in terms of what they can start to get into. Like some people might go in there and start to do static. Head up is a great one to start sharing some time on. Low speed is really hard to start sharing time on, but flying by yourself, low speed can be quite safe, like the carving anyway. I often like leave people in there without me spotting, just to give them a feel of what it's like to have the whole tunnel to themselves. So I kind of like try to give people the room and the space so that they can feel what it's like to fly by themselves. And then even sometimes like I've had students like fly a certain amount of time with me and then have an amount of time shared with, like that's been like when I've ran camps for like partners or something, they'll like do coaching with me and then they'll share some time at the end of it or something like that. But I think in the beginning, it's like, it's really beneficial to get in there and just, I guess, like also give yourself time to play around. I think that's where I'm like, I mean, I'm super lucky in the way that I've been a tunnel instructor while I've been flying in the tunnel for the whole time. So you kind of have like start flying sessions and stuff where it's like no stress, like you're not buying the time or anything. But it's hard for people on camps to get into that state of mind, or when you're paying so much time for the tunnel. I can see the monetary stress. You can see it in people's flying, and you can see it in people's like state of mind once they get into the tunnel. So I think a good thing is just to try to like mentally calm yourself, like breathe, relax a little bit, and give yourself time to play around as you would. Like if you're learning any kind of sport, like you're not going to spend your whole time only trying to progress. You're going to spend your time like playing around. Like if it's learning bodyweight stuff, movements or yoga or anything, like you're going to give yourself time to play around and not be just focused on progressing. And that's where the insights come, I think, as well, like trying to move your body in certain ways in the wind and trying to adjust yourself like very minimally, but seeing like what the actual context is that you're in, like how you can actually interact with the wind. And I think a lot of people never give themselves time or even think of that option because they always just want to be getting coached and moving towards a certain point that they want to go towards. But that's really beneficial. So I think, yeah, the main things would be open dialogue with coaches and spotters to see what you can actually do in there by yourself. And then trying to not mind just playing around.
And what are your thoughts on huck jams for tunnels?
They can be really good. I definitely don't want to work for one. Like, I definitely don't want to be on the door when there's one running.
What would your tips be for someone that like wanted to go to a huck jam? Like, would you say talk to some people that understand your flying capabilities before you go in, or like just for people that, because we have recently have a tunnel open in Melbourne, we have quite a lot of huck jams. So what advice would you give for someone that wants to try a huck jam?
I think to be honest, don't rush into it, because you're going to get a lot out of it if you can. I mean, static is what's going to happen in huck jams. Like, you're rarely going to go to a huck jam and there's going to be people that you can dynamic fly with. And especially depending on what kind of level that you're at with low speed dynamic, like it's super hard to share. So I think if you have a decent level of static, I think you can get a lot out of them. If it's going to be like large groups of people sharing. Otherwise, you just kind of get stuck on your belly, I think. If you're kind of doing a lot of low speed dynamic stuff, I think you'll get stuck kind of just either belly flying or back flying, because it's really hard for multiple people to just share the wind when there's such a space constraint and low speed takes up so much space. So I really started to find huck jams fun when I could fly a little bit more static. You get in there, like sit fly a little bit, it's super fun. Yeah.
What's the scariest incident you've had in the tunnel for yourself?
In the tunnel for myself, there was times where I was just getting back into it after I broke my leg, and I was like learning head down 360s or something, and just like went flying, like spinning out of control, and just smacked my leg into the wall. And I thought I re-broke my leg, and I had to like go back onto crutches for a little bit. But that was probably, I mean, my leg was still healing at that stage, but it had like a metal bar in it, so it wasn't so much of a worry to like actually re-break it, apparently. That, and then I've had some like, maybe like some slight concussions, but nothing serious, nothing where I've actually like lost consciousness. So.
And what did you learn from those things that you did? Like, what were the main things you got from that?
Not much.
Oh my God, that's not what I wanted to hear. Yeah, good.
I think for me, like after I did like went spinning out of control from the head down 360, I started to think maybe hucking things isn't the best way to go. But when I smacked my head, like those were just momentary lapses of concentration that just led to that. And I don't know if there's anything to really learn from it, apart from try not to have those momentary lapses in concentration. And maybe
what would you?
After I came back into it, and after because of the way that I started with the broken leg and everything, I think that now I definitely fly a little bit more conservative. Like, and I just know how like everything that I do is kind of predicated on having a healthy working body. So I probably am a little bit more reserved, and breaking my leg definitely taught me to slow down and not mind so much with not pushing myself all the time, or like I was much more reckless before that. I hadn't had like a proper injury. And then yeah, so that taught me to slow down a little bit for sure. Maybe that was what I learned. All right, before we go to the next question, I just need to run to the toilet. Is that okay?
Yeah, you can do that. That's okay. Does anyone else have any questions while Reed isn't here? Well, we're still going to touch on a lot about flexibility, and a lot of people asked about handstands and yoga and balance and things. So that's what we're going to touch on. Well, does anyone else have anything that they think they would be interested in talking about? If you do, just put it in the chat box and I'll ask them for you. But yeah, that's what's going to be discussed next. Will be I'm going to ask about skydiving incidences and what he learned. Then we'll go on to yoga, flexibility, balance, handstands and things like that, because quite a lot of people are interested in that type of thing from Reed. Cool.
All right.
You back?
Yeah.
Okay.
Yeah.
So what's your scariest incident in skydiving, and what did you learn from that?
In skydiving,
Yeah.
would be, I haven't had like major incidents, and most of it has just been to never, like, most of the takeaway has always just been to never stop gathering information and never assume someone's knowledge. Like, never assume someone's knowledge, and never assume someone's knowledge around what they need to tell you as well. Like, since I've been skydiving frequently, it's been a lot of load organizing and everything. So sometimes you need to tell people the information that you need. Like, you can't just expect them to know that one aspect of their jump is something that they should tell you about. I guess like there was one of the scarier incidents for me was when there was people. What was the exact scenario? It was two people doing a tracking jump, and I was doing a movement jump as well. I sent them out first because it suited the plans better, the jump plans better if they went out first, in terms of what I was doing, what they were doing. So it's hard to explain it without having like a whiteboard or something. But if it was, say, if my arm there is the jump run, then they got out here, tracked this way, and they had pulled higher. So they had pulled higher and they had started flying their canopies back because it was a long spot, and they flew straight back underneath my tracking group, and we tracked like right past their canopies. And when we got on the ground, I was obviously like thinking of how it could have happened, like how they ended up in that position under canopies already. It just didn't make sense to me. We'd given so much separation. We had tracked in opposite directions. If they tracked where they said that they were going to, it didn't make sense. And the thing was that since the spot had been long, this drop zone was it was doing questionable spots already, but they were kind of stuck in their ways of doing the spotting and everything, how they had been doing it. And they weren't really open to the coaches that were on that event. They weren't really open to our input on how to work with the spot or anything, which happens a lot of every drop zone is kind of stuck in its ways in a certain way. So what had happened was, as we were walking out to the plane, someone on ground crew that was just there to like open the gate when we could go out to the plane said, you guys should pull higher. So it was that like a bad direction from that guy, these guys flying straight back to the drop zone because the spot was long, not thinking of where my tracking group would be or anything. When we got onto the ground, I had asked them like why they pulled higher and why they didn't feel that was a point to tell me when we were going around and asking what the groups were doing. And then they said that he had told them that just before we were boarding the plane. So it was kind of one of those things where it was like an unlucky chain of events that led to the close call. But yeah, I think that one was kind of unavoidable because they weren't experienced jumpers, and this ground crew guy just said, as we were walking out to the plane, that they should pull higher. And they pulled higher and flew straight back up jump run because that was the way to the drop zone and it was a long spot. But then at that drop zone, at that event in particular, because the drop zone was kind of doing questionable things with jump run all the time, I found myself in some close calls, and that one was like, just, yeah, not assume that people know what they need to tell you. Like, if you want information, then you need to ask the information like directly or as clearly as you can. Other than that, it's just been like close calls with like free fall collisions and stuff, like someone just smacking into the back of me, or someone on their back just like zooming straight up past the formation. But it's kind of stuff that I can learn from in terms of where I put people. And I guess as as I go on in this, I usually I've become much more risk avoidant. Like, I think some people are kind of disappointed because I'm kind of like a little bit boring. Like, I think when you do it for a living, it's not really something that I want to be taking risks in constantly. So I think the thing for me is just being like along the journey. It's just been doing my best just to maintain a good level of safety and security on each jump. But then I've had like good jumpers just fly like straight through the formation. So then it's kind of like, there's nothing to say except don't do that. And they're like, well, I obviously didn't mean to do that. And I'm like, yeah, I don't really have anything to say to you because I know that you didn't mean to do that. And then it's just a matter of educating where the best spot is to be, or things to save yourself or stuff like that. But then that's all just like flying specific and person specific. But those would be the closest calls. I'm pretty like, yeah, I've had a pretty boring journey in that way. Like, it's not like I have any like near death stories or anything.
That's a good thing. And you're definitely not a boring coach. Like, I love you as a coach. Clearly, I stole you for a whole song one time, so I clearly like you. But what would your like recommendations be to a kind of like Elliot? He's a newer coach. And like Dom's coaching in the tunnel, and he'll probably come eventually probably to the sky. Speaking for Dom, but what would you give a newer coach that is getting into the scene to look out for, and kind of advice to your younger self?
Yeah, I think I got a lot of things cleared up in terms of knowledge that I should have, or things that I should be thinking about on every load when I went to the leading seminar, or not the seminar, but the leading course that Sharon and Luis Prenetto were doing. And while I was over in DeLand, they were running it. And I signed up to that and went to that, and that cleared up a lot of info, like a lot of kind of gray areas that I was unsure of in terms of like what happens in this situation when, if the winds are like this with the uppers, and how much drift you can potentially have. Like a lot of stuff that and then a lot of stuff that even I didn't really think about, or no, I didn't learn on the course, and just learned from experience, would just be, it's like, I mean, without just having a seminar about it, it's just the basic workings of like how jump run works, the basic like about the throw from the plane that you get when you're a flat or a vertical formation, like how jump runs can be altered or how they can be curved, or I guess all the information that I've acquired would just be to ask everybody around you. Probably similar to what I said about the canopy advice, like ask all of the most experienced jumpers around you. And because there's a lot of information. Like I remember sometimes we'd be at the drop zone and a friend or like someone else would be like, these guys didn't even know, like fill in the blanks. And they say something that they thought would be common knowledge for skydivers. And I was like, man, I swear that I didn't think about that until maybe like 200 or 300 jumps. Like there's so much information out there that you can go a long way in your skydiving career without knowing, if you don't ask anybody, or if you don't happen to be surrounded by people who are running seminars or anything like that. So I think the best method is just to ask so many questions. Like pick the people who you ask the questions to, and just don't be afraid to ask stupid questions.
Yeah. And what do you think the biggest issue in skydiving is today? Like, do you think there is a biggest issue in skydiving today?
I think the biggest issue today is...
Well, COVID.
No, but apart from the obvious, I don't know if there is a biggest issue. I see like in Australia, I think there's an issue around like building the population of skydivers and keeping it. But I think that's something that you see worldwide, except there's just much more of a population over in Europe or America. It has the population that it can sustain people dropping out of the sport. Whereas I feel like I mean, I haven't been active in Australia for a little while now. But I remember being really stoked, say, maybe like 2 years ago when I came back to Australia the first time, and there was more jumpers getting into it, people more frequently, like, yeah, I was really enjoying it then. But I think in Australia, I see the main problem is just building the skydiving population and keeping people for long enough that you can push the skills of everybody. Because in skydiving, which has sometimes annoyed me about the sport, is like you need other people to push your skills. And you need if you want to learn how to fly in bigger groups, you need the bigger groups to have that experience to improve yourself. Yeah, I would say that would be the main one in Australia.
What would your recommendation be for people? Obviously, we're having a long break from skydiving. Who knows how long? What would your recommendation when everyone does get back into the sport? What advice would you give to people?
Yeah, I mean, the obvious things are just like taking a step back from the skill level that you were before pre-COVID-19. Canopy is one thing. I always put canopy as kind of the biggest thing that I'm going to worry about. So in terms of free fall, like pick the jumps that you're going to do, pick them wisely, be a little bit more reserved once you get back into it. But especially under canopy is just like, if you were starting to learn turns or anything, like I even noticed for me, like if I'm not jumping for like 2 weeks, then the canopy for me feels like completely different. And that's after being like super current for many years now. It's still like a small time off still makes a world of difference. And even just the sight picture of a different drop zone can just make the world of a difference when you're flying canopy. So I think the canopy for me is something that I always put a lot of effort into keeping the regimen of safety really high. And I think that's where people would really need to check themselves before they get back in the sky, and check themselves once they get back in to just make sure that things are like, that they're not being complacent under canopy. Like, take your time on landing, keep awareness under canopy, find your place in the queue. Like, yeah, just all the things that we try to remind ourselves on a regular basis. But, you know, just being really, really cautious once we get back. So it's definitely going to be the biggest collective uncurrency that there's ever been.
And so this is going to switch kind of talks, but I got a lot of questions from people about, you're obviously known, well, especially in the Australian scene, to being like into yoga and having a lot of flexibility in your handstands and things. So people have asked me about male flexibility and flying.
Yeah.
So what are your thoughts on that, and how to improve male flexibility and use it for flying? Yeah. Or any flexibility, but.
Yeah, I think male flexibility in flying is something that you don't really see very often. There's not so much males that are flexible in general, and there's even less that are flexible in flying, I think. Male flexibility is a hard thing. I think it's not so much male flexibility in terms of its adult flexibility. Like, I was listening to a really interesting podcast about the differences between child flexibility and adult flexibility. And that was really interesting to think about. But in terms of male flexibility, like, it's not like it's a necessity or anything with the flying, but it is really hard to build, and you need to find the right method of flexibility and the right method of like mobility training that works for you. So what were people's questions more surrounding, like methods of achieving flexibility, or?
Yeah, like how did you talk about kind of methods of mobility of flexibility? Like how were your methods to learning how to be more flexible, and what kind of pathways did you take to get to where you are?
Yeah, so like recently I've changed it completely, and it's been working really well for me. I used to I've never had that bad a mobility if I was being like nice to myself. but I would never say that it's been that great or anything. I've never been like particularly gifted when it's come to flexibility. So I used to just stretch like the basic idea of what people have as stretching. I used to do that and I just got nowhere. I would achieve a little bit of a greater range, but not really that much in compared to what I wanted to be. So recently I've been adopting a completely different way of mobility and flexibility training that works more with strengthening the antagonist muscle of whatever you're trying to stretch. Like say you're trying to stretch your hamstrings. Well, from there, I'm going to strengthen the hip flexors, all the muscles of the hip flexors, the quads, and I'm going to work on having that range actively. And I think this works particularly well for males. So it's like, for me, it's the transition in the last like month. I mean, it's been a little bit longer than that, but I've been really focusing on it since the coronavirus hit. I've been focusing on it hardcore. And I bought this program from a guy named Emmett Lewis. He's an Irish guy, and he has really good methods of flexibility, and especially for adults and especially for males. And this works on strengthening your active range at the same time that you're trying to build a bigger passive range of flexibility. It works on some contractions that you do in these stretches that you're doing. But the main thing would just be the strengthening the antagonist muscle, like so that you can actually hold yourself with strength in that position. And these methods have been working like super well for me. Like the mobility in my hamstrings has gone way up in 3 weeks in comparison to like I've been trying to get more flexible for years with like varying degrees of success, but this is definitely the best. So if anyone wants to search him, like Emmett Lewis, he's insane. His stuff is super good.
Awesome. What do you strongly recommend to be competent on the yoga mat to get more out of your flying and skydiving?
I would think, for me, I think I see like the main problem that people have if I was to approach it from a skydiving and tunnel flying perspective would be that everybody has a terrible posture. And this terrible posture is really affecting people when it comes to the basic moves of like back carving and head up flying. Because nobody can hold this like openness and this like broadness through the chest. Like everyone's like thoracic spine is just completely used to flexion and never in any kind of extension, and nobody's comfortable to be in extension in their thoracic spine. No one's comfortable to like extend from the cervical spine and like extend through to like the back of the head and really lengthen up. So I think a lot of times for skydiving and tunnel flying, it would just be what I think people should be doing in general, which is just strengthening their basic muscles that support good posture and trying to build habits that extend your spine just a little bit at a time. And it's one thing in my journey that I've found, like the body changes really slowly, and you need to build habits, and you need to build new movement patterns. And one of the best ways I've found to do that has been kind of like Pilates movements. Like, I think it's things that a lot of people might resist a little bit because you want to get results faster, or you want to do something that feels like you're doing more, except doing basic movements, like different Pilates movements that are going to strengthen the deep core, like the connection between the abdominal sheet and the pubic bone that's going to hold your pelvis in a better position, that's going to help you with your flying immensely. And the thoracic spine mobility is where I see a lot of people falling back in flying. And then there's just some basic exercises that get you used to that thoracic extension and that get a little bit more mobility in the thoracic spine. I think that's the main spot for people. Like, and then for me, like, I would just say people want to strengthen like glutes, deep core, and become a little bit more extended through the thoracic spine. And there's a lot of Pilates movements and yoga movements that are really good at strengthening the glutes, Pilates in particular. And Pilates for the core as well, actually, just because it's so focused and it's so simple, the movements, and it's so based on form and technique. And then, yeah, just the stuff that's going to improve the thoracic spine for sure.
Yep. Elliot asked a lot about the flexibility mobility questions. Did you have anything you want to ask Elliot? No?
Yeah. Here he is. Yo, I can see a fan.
Yeah, check it my new No, like that was pretty interesting, the stuff you're saying about strengthening the antagonist. That's a lot of stuff I've been reading into in this last month and so.
Yeah.
Interesting that you say that like the thoracic spine is the part that you find people struggle with in terms of their posture in the tunnel. What about like hips, like quads and stuff like that? Because I found for myself in the tunnel, I was like particularly tight. See if I can just push this back a bit, might be able to slip it there. I was particularly tight, like
Yeah.
I was always like sitting in this position, and I was trying to get my thoracic spine up, but I just felt like I just sort of backsliding this way, forward driving up the top there. And it wasn't until I started like pressing down through here and then trying to be more active, like through my glutes and trying to open this angle up, down there, more stable.
Yeah, and that's where I think that the glute stability and glute strength is just so important. Like, I mean, I'm way less qualified to give this talk than you would be, except for me, like the things that I've learned in the last like couple of years, like more when we were on the camp together in Fly Spot, and I started to really like talk to you a lot and kind of like go through some basic Pilates style movements, was when I really started to kind of, the way that I look at it was like rebuilding my core structure. It was like rebuilding the movement patterns that I had and rebuilding the way that I felt structurally. And strengthening the glutes was a massive part of that. Without strengthening the glutes, like you're most likely over flexing through the hip flexors all the time, which is just going to lead them to be chronically shortened. You're going to be, whenever you bend down, instead of employing the glute strength, you're going to be employing the hamstrings and putting excess strain on the hamstrings, which is just going to lead them to just live in this kind of chronically shortened state. So yeah, I think the strengthening of the glutes, like I just think all the stuff that we talked about on the camp and Fly Spot, and all the stuff that Pilates kind of targets in its movements and its strengthening systems, I think is massively beneficial for flying. And it's like, it's just funny that it's the basic stuff and it's the basic movements that lead to your posture being better in everyday life is going to be the things that is really going to help people in their flying as well. Like you see so many people struggle to sit fly, but if they could extend through the thorax, then they would have no problem, or they would still have a slight problem, except they wouldn't have that, like, then they wouldn't be at the end of their mobility range. You know, like if you're learning to head up fly and you can't hold yourself with minimal effort in a straightened kind of spine position, then learning to sit fly where you need to be even more extended through the chest and extended through the thoracic spine, you're going to be working at the end of your end range. And if you're working at the end of your end range, you're not going to have much control. You're not going to have much awareness of what's happening. And it's just going to be way harder to learn, way harder to work in a position is what I think for sure.
Yeah, great. Thanks for that.
No probs, Baldy. Everyone's shaving their head. It's great. Sarah, you started a trend. All right. Sarah, you can unmute yourself now.
I do this all the time. I'm so silly. Some people did ask me as well, which is not skydiving related, but about your handstands. So is there any tips you have for people wanting to learn to handstand?
Yeah, for sure. I think this is like probably the part of the talk that people would be more interested in, because other than that, it's just like there's a million tunnel flyers and skydivers.
I know, but it's interesting to get perspective on how people, like everyone does talk, even though you, Tane and Dave, are very similar, all of you have different styles a tiny bit. So like it's nice to hear talks from different people, but yeah, people were very interested in the yoga and handstand side of things.
yeah. And I found, like, to be honest, like for me, handstands were one of the things that I feel like skyrocketed my awareness in the wind. And it's not like I would say to people that they need to learn to do handstands if they want to improve their flying, but awareness of the body, and especially awareness in a balanced position, is massively going to help your flying, just because it's going to teach you the nuances of like weight shift. It's going to teach you all these subtleties of movement in the body that you wouldn't get if you're just if you're engaged in other activities. I just don't think you get it so much. With the handstands, for me, I learned I didn't have to develop the strength. I had enough strength to do a shitty handstand in the beginning. So if people need to develop the strength for it, then I would say like some basic positions like the push-up plus or something, where you're gaining strength in the muscles supporting the shoulder blades and the shoulders in general. It would be like some basic kind of like planks, like high planks, like up on your hands, and pushing out through, like protracting the shoulder blades and just getting used to pushing through the shoulders, getting that strength in the shoulders. But then from there, like it's kind of boring, but just heaps of time up against the wall. Like, and it's important to give yourself enough space from the wall that you have a chance to save yourself. Like I would practice I would practice my shin length from the wall, because then if I was like this, then I would bend, if it's gonna show me, I would bend one leg, put that into the wall, and then I'd have one leg straight so that I could maintain a good alignment through the hips and the chest without being just this like arched banana kind of position. And then from there, it was just heaps of wall time, heaps of feeling out the balances. Like all of a sudden I could feel a balance, and I could feel myself actually causing the balance for a little bit, and then it built up, and then it built up, and then you get more strength through the foundation, through the hands and the forearms and everything. But if people do put the effort in, it makes a massive difference for flying. Like I found when I started to get competent in a handstand and be able to move my legs around a little bit and play around with like just different shapes in the handstand, I was getting back in the tunnel, and I was just learning these like kind of like these freestyle breaker kind of variations, and I was just feeling like so good. It taught me a lot about subtleties of the weight shift and the balance in the body.
Everyone's going to be doing handstands now.
Everybody is anyway. I love it.
We're trying. I suck at them, but that's because I giggle too much and I laugh and I fall down. Does anyone else have any questions at all? You can all unmute yourself if you want to ask any questions. No one ever asks any questions when this happens. This is why I prepare so many questions. I think that's anything.
Cool. Good talk. Oh God, I can't hear you. Can you hear me? You're not muted, but it looks like you've like lost your audio completely. Well, this is awkward.
Yep, Sarah's gone.
Talk to me. Ah, Arno's back.
Yeah, I'll pretend to be Sarah.
Yeah, you came just in time.
Thank you, Reed.
All you need to do is just giggle uncontrollably.
Can you,
Oh,
can you hear me?
yeah. Now you're back.
Yeah.
I think
Yeah?
so. Yeah.
Okay. Sorry, I'll try not giggle as much. Does anyone else have anything they want to add?
So if I understood correctly, Bendigo and Voss is just the same thing.
Yeah, more or less. Yeah,
Yeah.
it's really similar. I love being back here. If anyone's interested though, I did buy some mustache wax, so I will be curling up and doing some Salvador Dali style mustaches soon. Helena, I know you're keen on the mustache, so you don't even need to unmute yourself to tell me that you love the mustache. I can see it on your face already. It's approval, 100% approval. Thank you.
Awesome. Well, thank you everyone for attending.